June 1945, Lüneburg, northern Germany. 20-year-old Frieda Hartmann stood behind the wire fence of the British detention camp, staring at men who looked nothing like the monsters she'd been taught to fear. She'd been working as a translator for the British occupation authorities for 3 weeks, 21 days of processing paperwork, translating discharge documents, and trying not to stare at the soldiers who moved through the camp with an ease that felt completely alien. Her job was simple: translate German prisoner statements into English, process release papers for Wehrmacht soldiers being sent home, type reports, administrative work, nothing dangerous, nothing that required extended contact with British personnel. But Frieda had a problem she couldn't control: curiosity. Deep, consuming curiosity about these men who had destroyed her country and then showed up offering chocolate to children. The British soldiers stationed at Lüneburg were mostly from the 7th Armoured Division, the famous Desert Rats. They'd fought from North Africa to Normandy to Berlin. They'd seen everything the war had to offer. And now they were here, managing the bureaucratic nightmare of occupation, trying to sort 20 million displaced Germans into some kind of order. Frieda had grown up in Hanover, 30 miles south. Her father had been a postal clerk. Her mother had worked in a textile factory. Normal family, normal life, until the war consumed everything. Her father had been drafted in 1943, died at Kursk. Her older brother had been killed in France in 1944. 16 years old, too young to shave, old enough to die for the Reich. Her mother had survived the bombing of Hanover in 1945. Barely. She'd been pulled from the rubble of their apartment building with a fractured skull and broken ribs. She died 3 weeks later in a field hospital. Infection. No antibiotics available. Too many wounded. Not enough medicine. Frieda had been alone at 19. No family, no home. The apartment building was rubble. The city was ruins. And then the British arrived. They'd set up a civilian administration office in what used to be a school, posted notices looking for Germans who spoke English. Translators needed, food provided, accommodation provided. The pay was in British military scrip, worthless outside the occupation zone, but it came with rations. Real food, bread, tinned meat, powdered milk. Frieda had learned English from a private tutor before the war. Her parents had saved money for years to pay for lessons. They'd believed education was the way forward, that knowing English would give their daughter opportunities. They couldn't have known that opportunity would come in the form of working for an occupying army. The interview had been brief. A British major named Thompson asked her to translate a paragraph from German to English. She did it flawlessly. He asked her to translate a paragraph from English to German. She did that too. He hired her on the spot. Started the next day. 8 hours a day, 6 days a week, Sundays off. The work was tedious. Prisoner statements. Name: Klaus Weber. Age: 23. Unit: 12th Panzer Division. Captured April 1945. Crime: none. Status: awaiting discharge. Hundreds of them. Thousands. Young men who'd been drafted, sent to fight, captured, and were now waiting to go home to a Germany that didn't exist anymore. But what fascinated Frieda wasn't the paperwork. It was the British soldiers themselves. They were nothing like what she'd expected. For 12 years, Nazi propaganda had portrayed the British as barbaric, cruel, bloodthirsty, bombers of women and children, merchants of death who fought for money instead of ideology. But the British soldiers at Lüneburg didn't act barbaric. They acted tired, bored, homesick. They played football in the yard during breaks. They smoked cigarettes and complained about the food. They wrote letters home. They looked like normal men doing a job they were exhausted by. Frieda found herself watching them. Not romantically, not initially, just observing, trying to reconcile what she'd been taught with what she was seeing. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming. One soldier in particular caught her attention. Sergeant William Foster, 25 years old, from a place called Yorkshire. He worked in the camp administration office, processing the same discharge papers Frieda translated. They worked in the same building, shared the same office space, spent 8 hours a day, 10 feet apart. William was tall, maybe 6 feet, sandy hair, blue eyes. He had a scar on his left hand, 3 fingers, looked like a burn. Frieda had noticed it the first day. Noticed everything about him, actually. The way he chewed his pencil when he was concentrating, the way he hummed under his breath, the way he was unfailingly polite to everyone, German prisoners, British officers, civilian workers. For the first week, they didn't speak beyond professional necessity. "Can you translate this?" "Yes, Sergeant." "Is this spelling correct?" "Yes, Sergeant." Formal, distant, appropriate. But Frida was curious, desperately curious. She wanted to know everything. Why was he kind to German prisoners? Why did he treat her like a colleague instead of a defeated enemy? Why did he smile when she made mistakes instead of reprimanding her? The questions consumed her. At night, lying in her narrow cot in the civilian workers' barracks, she thought about them. During meals, sitting alone in the mess hall, she thought about them. Walking to work each morning, she thought about them. She knew it was dangerous. Curiosity about the enemy was the first step towards something worse. Sympathy, understanding, the kind of thinking that got German women labelled as traitors. But she couldn't stop. The first real conversation happened on a Tuesday, June 19th, 1945. The office was unusually quiet. Most of the officers were at a briefing. Frida was alone with William, both of them working through stacks of discharge papers. "Can I ask you something?" The words came out before she could stop them. English words, her accent thick. William looked up from his paperwork. "Course, what is it?" "Why do you work with us? With Germans? You must hate us." He set down his pencil, thought for a moment. "I don't hate you. I hate what your government did, what the Nazis did. But you're not the Nazis. You're just someone trying to survive." "But we supported them. We voted for Hitler. We cheered at the rallies. We are guilty." "Are you?" He leaned back in his chair. "You were what, 8 years old when Hitler came to power? You didn't vote for him. You were a child. Children don't start wars." "I was in the Hitler Youth. I believed what they taught us. So did millions of German kids. Doesn't make you a war criminal. Makes you a victim of propaganda." He paused. "Look, I've been fighting since 1940. North Africa, Italy, France, Germany. I've seen what the Nazis did, the camps, the executions, the whole bloody horror of it. But I've also seen German civilians who had nothing to do with any of it. Old people, kids, women like you just trying to survive. I can hate the Nazis and still treat you like a human being." Frida felt tears burning behind her eyes. No one had said anything like that to her since the war ended. Every German she knew carried guilt like a weight that would never lift. But here was an enemy soldier, someone who had fought against Germany for 5 years, telling her she wasn't responsible for the crimes of her government. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For treating me like a person." He smiled, small, sad. "Everyone deserves that, even Germans." That conversation changed everything. Not immediately, not dramatically, but something shifted. Frida stopped seeing William as an enemy soldier and started seeing him as a person. And once she started seeing him as a person, she couldn't stop being curious about him. And over the following weeks, they talked during breaks, small conversations, nothing deep. He told her about Yorkshire, about growing up on a farm, about joining the army in 1939 because all his mates were joining, about fighting in the desert, about the heat and the sand and the boredom punctuated by terror. She told him about Hanover, about her parents, about studying literature at university before the war shut everything down, about the bombing, about losing everyone. The conversations were therapeutic. Frida hadn't realized how much she needed to talk, to say the things she'd been holding inside, to admit that she was angry at Germany for starting the war, that she was ashamed of what had been done in her country's name, that she didn't know how to live with that shame. William listened, never judged, never told her she was wrong to feel what she felt, just listened. The other German workers noticed. The whispers started. "Frida and the British sergeant. She spends too much time with him. She's forgetting which side she's on." One woman, Helena, cornered her in the washroom. Helena was 35, bitter, had lost her husband and 2 sons in the war. "You should be careful," Helena said. "People are watching. People are talking." "We're just talking," Frida said. "It's work." It doesn't look like work. It looks like you're making friends with the enemy. Helena's voice was sharp. You know what they did to French women who collaborated? You want that to happen to you? Frida knew. Everyone knew. Photographs of French women being paraded through streets with shaved heads, beaten, humiliated, punishment for being with German soldiers during the occupation. The same thing was already happening in parts of Germany. Women accused of being with Allied soldiers, attacked, marked. I'm not collaborating with anyone, Frida said. Then stop talking to him. Stop smiling when he walks into the room. Stop acting like you care what he thinks. Helena grabbed her arm. I'm trying to help you. This won't end well, but Frida couldn't stop. The curiosity had grown into something else. Not attraction exactly. Not romantic interest. Something more complicated. Respect. Admiration. The recognition that this British soldier was a better person than most of the Germans she'd known during the war. William had fought in the desert, had killed German soldiers, had seen his friends die. But he wasn't cruel, wasn't bitter, wasn't filled with the kind of hatred that Frida had seen in German soldiers' eyes when they talked about the enemy. She started asking him questions, real questions, not about the weather or the work, about the war, about what he'd seen, about how he reconciled killing people with being a decent human being. He answered honestly. Said he didn't reconcile it, said killing people haunted him, said he saw the faces of men he'd shot every time he closed his eyes, said the only way he survived was by telling himself he was fighting for something bigger than himself, to stop fascism, to prevent genocide, to end a war that had already killed millions. Does it work? Frida asked. Telling yourself that? Sometimes. He looked tired when he said it. Sometimes I believe it. Sometimes I think I'm just making excuses for murder. Doesn't matter what the cause is. I still killed people. Still took fathers away from children. Still made women widows. Nothing makes that okay. But you did it to stop worse things. That's what I tell myself. He lit a cigarette, hands shaking slightly. Doesn't make it true. Just makes it bearable. Frida understood that. She'd spent years telling herself that Germany was fighting for survival, that the British and Americans were the aggressors, that everything Germany did was self-defense. She'd believed it because believing it made life bearable. Questioning it meant admitting her country was evil, admitting her brother had died for nothing. But the evidence was overwhelming. Germany had started the war. Germany had invaded Poland, France, Russia. Germany had built the camps. The death camps, the ones the British had liberated, the ones with photographs that Frida had seen and wished she could unsee, mountains of bodies, living skeletons, children who looked like old people. Germany had done that. Her country, her people. Not all Germans, but enough to build the camps, enough to staff them, enough to kill 6 million people systematically, industrially, efficiently. The guilt was crushing. But talking to William helped. He didn't absolve her, didn't tell her it wasn't her fault, but he also didn't condemn her. Just listened. Acknowledged that carrying guilt was hard, that being German in 1945 meant living with shame that might never fade. My grandmother was German, William said one day. Came to England in 1920. Married my grandfather. Had my mum. She died in 1943. Heart attack. But before she died, she told me something. She said Germany was a good country that had been poisoned. Said the German people weren't evil, just scared and desperate and willing to believe anyone who promised to make things better. She said I should remember that if I ever fought against Germany, that the enemy wasn't German people. It was the ideology that infected them. Did you believe her? Frida asked. I didn't know. Didn't know until I got here. Until I met Germans like you, people who were just trying to survive, who hated the Nazis as much as we did, who lost everything to a war they never wanted. He paused. My grandmother was right. The enemy was never you. It was what was done to you. Those words stayed with Frida. She repeated them to herself at night. The enemy was what was done to you. It didn't absolve Germany. Didn't erase the camps, but it gave her a framework for understanding how a nation could fall so far, how ordinary people could support extraordinary evil, Not because they were monsters, but because they were scared, desperate, and willing to believe anyone who promised salvation. July 1945. The occupation was settling into routine. Prisoners were being processed and released, thousands per week. The camps were emptying. British soldiers were being rotated out. The first wave of occupation troops going home, replaced by peacetime garrison units. William was scheduled to leave in August. Rotation orders, back to England. Discharge from the army, return to civilian life. Frida knew it was coming, but knowing didn't make it easier. Over 2 months, William had become the one person she could talk to honestly. The one person who didn't judge her for being German. The one person who saw her as Frida, not as defeated enemy, not as Hitler Youth graduate, just Frida. She didn't love him, at least not romantically. But she needed him. Needed the conversations. Needed the perspective. Needed someone who could help her make sense of everything that had happened. "What will you do?" she asked him one afternoon. "After you go home?" "Don't know yet. Probably go back to the farm, help my dad, he's getting old, can't manage it alone anymore." He smiled. "Funny. I spent my whole life trying to get away from that farm, joined the army to see the world. Now all I want is to go back, work the land, raise some sheep, never leave Yorkshire again." "That sounds peaceful." "It does, doesn't it? Peace. Real peace. Not just absence of war, but actual quiet. No explosions, no death, just rain and grass and sheep too stupid to know there was ever a war." "I envy you," Frida said quietly. "You get to go home. Germany is my home, but it's not home anymore. Everything's destroyed. Everyone's dead or scattered. I don't know where I belong." William looked at her seriously. "Come with me." The words hung in the air. Impossible, insane, completely serious. "What?" "Come to England. You speak English. You're smart. You could get work, start over, leave all this behind." "I can't." "Why not?" "Because I'm German. Because your country would hate me. Because I'd be the enemy living among you. Because—" She stopped, took a breath. "Because running away doesn't fix anything. Germany needs to rebuild. Someone has to stay. Someone has to face what happened. If everyone like me runs away, who's left? Just the people who still believe the Nazis were right." William nodded slowly. "You're probably right. Doesn't mean I'm not going to ask again." "Don't." Frida felt tears burning. "Please don't ask again. The answer won't change. I can't abandon Germany. Even after everything, especially after everything." He didn't ask again, but the offer hung between them for the rest of July. Unspoken, acknowledged, impossible. August 1945. William's rotation orders came through. Departure date, August 15th. Transport to Calais, then across the Channel to Dover. From there, discharge processing at Aldershot, then home to Yorkshire. Frida knew she'd never see him again. The occupation would continue for years, but William would be gone. Back to his farm, back to his sheep, back to a life that had nothing to do with Germany or the war or the girl who translated prisoner statements. They didn't say goodbye dramatically, just a quiet conversation on his last day. "Thank you," Frida said, "for being kind, for listening, for helping me understand that not everything is black and white. Thank you for reminding me that the enemy is never as simple as we're told." He handed her a piece of paper. "My address in Yorkshire, if you ever need anything, or if you just want to write. Let me know how things turn out." She took the paper, folded it carefully, put it in her pocket. "I will." She didn't watch him leave, didn't go to the transport yard to see the trucks depart, just stayed in the office typing discharge papers, pretending everything was normal. But that night, alone in her room, she unfolded the paper and read the address. A farm in Yorkshire. A place she'd never see. A person she'd never forget. Frida Hartmann worked for the British occupation authorities until 1949. 4 years of translating documents, processing paperwork, helping rebuild Germany from the inside. She never married, never had children, dedicated her life to education instead, became a teacher, taught English and history to German students for 36 years. She wrote to William Foster twice, once in 1946, letting him know she was well, once in 1950, telling him she'd become a teacher. He wrote back both times, short letters, updates on life in Yorkshire. The farm was doing well. His father had retired. William had married a local girl, had a son. They never wrote after that. Different worlds, different lives. But the curiosity that had brought them together stayed with Frida for the rest of her life. She taught her students that curiosity was essential, that asking questions, especially difficult questions, was how humanity moved forward. That understanding your enemy was the first step toward peace. When Frida died in 1991, her students organised a memorial. Over 200 former students attended. They spoke about her impact, her compassion, her insistence that Germany face its past honestly. One student said something that captured her philosophy perfectly. Fräulein Hartmann taught us that curiosity isn't weakness. It's the bravest thing you can do. Among her belongings, her niece found a small box. Inside was a piece of paper with an address in Yorkshire. On the back, in Frida's handwriting, the British soldier who taught me that enemies are just people we haven't learned to understand yet. The story of German women and Allied soldiers after World War II is complicated. Some relationships were exploitation, some were survival, but some, like Frida and William, were about two people trying to understand each other across an impossible divide. Frida couldn't hide her curiosity because curiosity was how she survived. In a world where everything she'd believed had been proven false, where her country had committed atrocities beyond comprehension, where being German meant carrying guilt that might never fade, curiosity was the tool she used to rebuild her understanding of humanity. She was curious about the enemy, and that curiosity taught her that enemies aren't born. They're created by governments, by propaganda, by fear, and they can be unmade by conversation, by honesty, by the willingness to see each other as human. That lesson, learned in a British detention camp in 1945, shaped the rest of her life. She spent 36 years teaching it to German students, teaching them to ask questions, to be curious about people who seemed different, to never stop trying to understand. That's how reconciliation actually happens. Not through grand political gestures, not through treaties or reparations, through individual people deciding to be curious instead of hateful, to ask questions instead of making assumptions, to see the person behind the uniform. Frida Hartmann's curiosity changed lives, not just hers, not just William's, but the lives of every student she taught. Every person she convinced that understanding was possible. Every German who learned from her that their country's past required honest confrontation, not denial. History calls it the occupation. Frida called it the beginning of understanding. And it started with a simple act. A German girl who couldn't hide her curiosity about the British soldiers who had defeated her country and then showed up offering chocolate to children.